Hello, my name is Nicholas Kringle, and I wanted to talk today about what led to the starting of the Assemblies of God Church in 1914 in Hot Springs, Arkansas. How the Assembly of God came about started roughly 4 years before this in 1901. 1901, on New Year's Day, a lady named Agnes Osmond was attending a Bethel Bible School in Topeka, Kansas. They were studying Acts 2 and discussing the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. When Agnes prayed to God to anoint her with the Holy Spirit and bestow on her the gift of speaking in tongues. As it worked out, Agnes began speaking in tongues, and this kicked off the whole Pentecostal movement. The leader of the school at that time was a man named Charles Parham. Parham was known as a full gospel preacher and for teaching on speaking in tongues, which he called the biblical evidence for the baptism of the Holy Spirit, or as many know, the third baptism. This is where the Assemblies of God gets its eighth fundamental truth, the initial physical evidence of the baptism in the Holy Spirit, which is speaking in tongues. Charles Parham eventually started teaching at a school in Houston, Texas, where a better-known influential person, William Joseph Seymour, enters our timeline. Seymour was born in Centersville, Louisiana, to a couple of former slaves. Seymour experienced many different denominations in his life that helped form his personal eschatology and theology. He grew up with a combination of Baptist and Catholic beliefs. When he got older, he went to a Methodist Episcopal church for a bit. Then Seymour moved to Anderson, Indiana, where he joined the Evening Light Saints, which is modern today known as the Church of God. This is where Seymour learned about sanctification, which is the second baptism, and the importance of church unity. Also during this time, Seymour ended up contracting smallpox, which caused him to lose his sight in one of his eyes. Seymour took this as a sign from God that he needed to follow his calling into ministry and stop avoiding it. Therefore, in 1905, Seymour moved to Texas to attend no other than Charles Parham's school. At Parham School, Seymour quickly learned and embraced the teaching of the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and that speaking in tongues is the initial evidence of that. A year after Seymour arrived at the school, he was invited to preach in Los Angeles, California, at a holiness mission by a woman named Julius W. Hutchins. But after just one sermon, they would not let him back in the building to preach because of his radical theology concerning the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Seymour had nowhere to go, so a local man named Edward S. Lee offered Seymour a room in his house. Seymour stayed with Lee while waiting for guidance from God on what to do next. Seymour started a prayer group and Bible study. The Bible study prayer group quickly outgrew the house and moved a couple of blocks over to a bigger house. During this time, Seymour started increasing his time praying and fasting. Seymour already had a strict regimen of praying 5 hours a day, which he had been diligently practicing for 3.5 years. At this point, Seymour, who still had not experienced the baptism of the Holy Spirit, but desperately wanted to, increased his prayer time to 7 hours every day. Finally, on April 9th, 1906, after 10 days fast, the baptism of the Holy Spirit came upon Seymour and a handful of people at the Bible study, and they began speaking in tongues. This caused the group to grow even more, and even bigger house had to be found. They ended up finding a bigger building on Azusa Street. It was 40 feet by 60 feet, building 312. The revival continued for 3 years straight. People came from all around to see what the hype was all about. Many well-known preachers and newspapers came to check it out as well, including Seymour's former teacher, Charles Parham. Parham, though, was not impressed and tried to take over the mission, but the congregation did not allow it. This ended up kicking Parham out of the building. A couple other prominent ministers of the time also tried to take over the Azusa Street mission, but were unsuccessful. Ultimately, what ended up ending the revival was infighting at the mission, and the church started segregating into different groups. Thousands of people, though, were touched by the Holy Spirit and brought the revival back to their hometowns. Over 26 modern denominations trace their Pentecostal roots back to Azusa Street, including the Assemblies of God. Thank you.